They say you can't judge a book by its cover, but in the high-stakes world of horse auctions, first impressions are everything. And on that crisp autumn morning, two men from different worlds were about to learn this lesson the hard way. On one side stood William Blackwood, his tailored suit and confident smirk, announcing his status before he even opened his mouth. A self-made millionaire with a stable of champion racehorses, Blackwood had built his reputation on picking winners. His presence at the small county auction raised eyebrows, the equivalent of a wolf stalking among sheep. On the other side was Tom Henley, weathered hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jacket. A third-generation farmer struggling to keep his family's land, Tom wasn't supposed to be bidding that day. He'd come to sell, not buy. But fate has a funny way of changing plans. What caught your eye about that sorry-looking nag? The question came from Blackwood's associate as they watched Tom lead a thin, mud-splattered horse across the auction yard. Blackwood's laugh echoed across the grounds. Nothing caught my eye. That's the point. Some animals aren't worth the hay they eat. The horse in question didn't look like much. Ribs showing through a dull coat, head hanging low, it barely responded when Tom gently patted its neck. But there was something in the farmer's eyes when he looked at that horse, a quiet certainty that puzzled onlookers. $200, Tom had bid, his voice steady despite the murmurs around him. For a horse that looked one step away from the glue factory, even that seemed generous. When Blackwood stepped forward, the crowd fell silent. "Let me save you some money, farmer," he announced, voice dripping with condescension. "That horse won't plow a straight line or carry a child. It's worthless." Tom simply nodded, eyes fixed on the auctioneer. $200, he repeated. No one else bid. The gavel fell, and the horse was his. Throwing good money after bad, Blackwood remarked loudly as Tom led his purchase away. Some people never learn. What Blackwood didn't know, what no one at the auction realized, was that Tom Henley had recognized something in that horse's eyes that others had missed. Something that told him this wasn't just any animal. Behind the matted mane and prominent ribs was a secret that would soon turn the tables on everyone who'd laughed that day. 6 months later, when the prestigious Bluegrass Stakes was about to begin, Blackwood stood at the rail in his owner's box, surveying the competition. His own prized thoroughbred was the heavy favorite to win. But then, at the far end of the paddock, a stunning chestnut stallion caught his eye, muscles rippling beneath a gleaming coat as it pranced beside its handler. "Who owns that horse?" Blackwood demanded, something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. His associate checked the program. "Says here it belongs to Henley Farms." As the horses lined up at the starting gate, Blackwood's confident smile began to fade. Because sometimes the best investments aren't the ones that shine the brightest at first glance. The starting bell rang, and the gates flew open. Hooves thundered against dirt as the horses surged forward, a blur of motion and power. Blackwood gripped the rail, knuckles white, his usual composure cracking as he watched the chestnut stallion, Tom Henley's horse, break from the pack with surprising speed. "Impossible," he muttered, pressing his binoculars harder against his face. The story of how that horse came to be running in the Bluegrass Stakes began months earlier, after that fateful auction. While Blackwood had returned to his mansion to celebrate another successful acquisition for his racing empire, Tom Henley had slowly led his purchase back to a small trailer, hitched to a rusted pickup. "You sure about this, Dad?" Tom's teenage daughter had asked when he arrived home, eyeing the sorry-looking animal. "We barely have enough feed for the animals we need." Tom had simply smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something others don't. "Trust me, Annie, this horse has royal blood in him." What Blackwood hadn't recognized, what almost everyone had missed, was the subtle marking on the horse's right flank, nearly invisible beneath layers of dirt and neglect. Tom had spotted it instantly, the distinctive star-shaped birthmark that belonged to only one bloodline in Kentucky. "That's Lightning's promise," Tom had whispered to himself at the auction, recognizing the missing yearling from Oak Ridge Farms, one of the most prestigious breeding operations in the state. The colt had disappeared during a storm 2 years earlier, presumed dead after the barn fire that had claimed his mother. How the animal had survived and where he'd been remained a mystery. But Tom knew horses better than he knew people. His grandfather had been a stable hand at Oak Ridge for 40 years, and Tom had grown up hearing stories about the legendary bloodlines. One look in those intelligent eyes had told him everything he needed to know. The rehabilitation wasn't easy. The first month, the horse, whom Tom had quietly named Promise, would hardly eat. Traumatized and distrustful, he shied away from human contact. Tom spent hours just sitting in the stall, reading aloud from his daughter's schoolbooks, letting the animal grow accustomed to his presence. "People think patience is doing nothing," he told Annie one evening. "But sometimes it's the hardest work there is." Gradually, Promise began to change. His coat regained its luster. His frame filled out, revealing the powerful muscles hidden beneath months of malnutrition. And when Tom finally saddled him, the horse moved with a grace that took his breath away. Word traveled slowly at first, a few neighbors noticing the stunning animal in Tom's modest paddock. Then local trainers stopping by with thinly veiled offers. Tom turned them all down. "He's not for sale," became his simple response. Instead, Tom reached out to an old friend, Jimmy Walsh, a retired jockey who had once ridden for Oak Ridge Farms. When Jimmy saw Promise, he wept. "It's like seeing a ghost," he'd said, running his hands along the horse's powerful neck. "You know what you've got here, don't you?" Tom had nodded. "I know what he could be with the right training." Neither man spoke the obvious truth. Entering a horse in the Bluegrass Stakes required an entry fee larger than Tom's mortgage payment. But Jimmy had connections, and more importantly, he believed in second chances, for horses and for people. Now, watching from the cheaper stands in his owner's box, Blackwood's expression darkened as his horse struggled to catch up to the chestnut stallion. The race was only half over, but already he could see what was happening. His mind raced back to the auction, replaying the moment when he'd so confidently dismissed Tom's purchase. There was something familiar about that horse, something he should have recognized. As they approached the final turn, Promise and Royal Decree pulled away from the pack, neck and neck, two forces of nature locked in battle. And suddenly Blackwood remembered where he'd seen those eyes before. The roar of the crowd faded to a distant buzz in Blackwood's ears as realization washed over him like ice water. Those distinctive eyes, that particular stride, this was no ordinary horse rescued from neglect. This was Phantom's legacy, the most promising foal ever bred at Oak Ridge Farms before the devastating fire. The colt that Blackwood himself had tried to purchase for a small fortune before the tragedy. "Sir, are you all right?" His assistant's voice barely registered as Blackwood's mind raced. 2 years ago, he'd offered Oak Ridge's owner, the elderly Mrs. Patterson, an amount that would have set her up for life. She'd refused, claiming some horses weren't meant to be sold. 3 weeks later, the fire had claimed half the stable, including the prized mare. The foal's body was never found. On the track, Promise and Royal Decree thundered toward the finish line, the gap between them closing and opening like a heartbeat. The jockey on Royal Decree was using the whip now, desperation evident in every motion. Atop Promise, Jimmy Walsh rode with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what his horse could do, hands steady, body moving in perfect harmony with the animal beneath him. In the stands, Annie Henley clutched her father's arm, her face a mirror of his tension and hope. "Can he really win, Dad?" she whispered, voice almost lost in the thundering cheers around them. Tom couldn't answer. The past 6 months of early mornings and late nights of penny pinching and prayer had led to this moment. A win would mean more than pride. The purse could save their farm. But even as he watched Promise run like his ancestors before him, Tom knew this race had attracted unwanted attention. Back at Henley Farms, Tom's wife Laura paced the worn kitchen floor, radio turned to the race coverage, hands busy with nervous work. She'd supported Tom's decision to buy the horse, but reality had been harsh. Bills had piled up. Their savings had dwindled to nearly nothing. Promise's rehabilitation and training had taken resources they barely had. And coming into the final stretch, it's Royal Decree and the newcomer Promise, neck and neck. The announcer's voice crackled through the old radio. Laura closed her eyes, unable to watch even in her mind's eye. What none of the Henleys knew was that Mrs. Patterson, now in a nursing home across the county, was also listening. Her nurse had turned up the volume when the announcer mentioned a surprising contender named Promise. Something about the description had made the old woman's eyes sharpen with interest. "Could you call my lawyer?" Mrs. Patterson had asked suddenly. "I believe I need to verify something rather important." As Promise and Royal Decree crossed the finish line in what appeared to be a photo finish, another drama was unfolding in the VIP viewing area. A tall, distinguished man in a tailored suit observed the race through narrow eyes, his attention fixed, not on the horses, but on Blackwood's reaction. This was Howard Thorne, Blackwood's former business partner and now his fiercest rival. He recognized the horse too, and more importantly, he'd recognized an opportunity. "Find out everything about this farmer," he instructed his assistant quietly. "And I mean everything." The announcer's voice rang out across the track. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a photo finish. Please stand by for the official results." The tension in the air was electric as thousands held their breath. Tom stood perfectly still, one arm around Annie, the other holding his weathered hat to his chest. Blackwood had moved to the judge's area, his confident smile back in place but not quite reaching his eyes. When the results flashed on the board, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. By less than a nose, Promise had won. The celebration in the winner's circle was brief and bewildering for the Henleys. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and officials presented the trophy with practiced smiles. Through it all, Tom kept his eyes on Promise, the horse standing calmly amid the chaos, as if he'd always belonged there. "Mr. Henley," a smooth voice cut through the noise. Blackwood approached, hand extended, that same smirk playing on his lips. "Congratulations on your unexpected victory. I wonder if we might discuss the future of your remarkable horse." Before Tom could answer, another voice joined the conversation. "I believe there might be some questions about ownership that should be addressed first." Howard Thorne stepped forward, business card extended. "Your horse bears a striking resemblance to a valuable animal that went missing, not died, in the Oak Ridge fire." Tom felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "I bought him fair and square at auction." "Yes," Thorne agreed smoothly. "But the question is, who had the right to sell him?" As cameras continued to flash around them, Tom saw Blackwood's expression change from calculated charm to something harder, more dangerous. Whatever was happening went beyond a simple horse race or a wealthy man's bruised ego. And then his phone rang. It was Laura, her voice tight with concern. "Tom, there's someone here at the farm. They're from Oak Ridge Stables, with papers about Promise." And Tom, they'd brought Mrs. Patterson herself. Tom's drive back to the farm felt endless, the trophy sitting forgotten on the passenger seat as his mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Annie sat in the back with Jimmy, both silent. The celebration of their victory evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. When they pulled up to the farmhouse, Tom's stomach dropped. 3 expensive cars were parked in the yard. A sleek black sedan he didn't recognize, Blackwood's unmistakable luxury sports car, and an accessible van with the Oak Ridge Farms logo emblazoned on its side. Somehow Blackwood had beaten them here. "Dad," Annie's voice was small, uncertain. "What's happening?" Tom squeezed her hand. "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever it is, we'll face it together." Inside, they found an unlikely gathering in their modest living room. Laura stood by the window, arms crossed, face tight with worry. Blackwood and Thorne occupied opposite corners, watching each other like circling wolves. A lawyer in an expensive suit sat at their dining table, documents spread before him. And in the center of it all, in a wheelchair, sat an elegant elderly woman Tom recognized immediately from newspaper photos, Margaret Patterson, once the queen of Kentucky horsebreeding. "Mr. Henley," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice stronger than her frail appearance suggested, "I've been waiting to meet you." For the next hour, the story unfolded piece by piece. The night of the fire, a stable boy had managed to free several horses, including the prized colt. In the chaos, the animals had scattered. When the stable boy tried to report that the colt had escaped, he'd been dismissed. The official report already stated that the valuable young horse had perished with its mother. But that's not what happened, was it, William? Mrs. Patterson fixed Blackwood with a steely gaze. Blackwood's face remained impassive. "I had nothing to do with the fire investigation." "Perhaps not directly," Thorne interjected smoothly. "But your insurance company handled the claim, and your former stable manager was hired by the investigation team." Quite a coincidence. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Patterson has documentation proving that the horse known as Promise is in fact Phantom's legacy, legally owned by Oak Ridge Farms." Tom felt the floor shift beneath him. "I purchased him legally at auction. I have the papers." "From an auction house that couldn't verify the horse's origin," the lawyer countered. "The sale can be invalidated." "That's why I'm here," Blackwood said, stepping forward. "I'm prepared to offer you compensation for your investment and trouble. Generous compensation." "As am I," Thorne added quickly. "Plus a position in my stables for you, Mr. Henley. Your skill with horses is evident." Tom looked between the two wealthy men, suddenly understanding. This wasn't about legalities. This was about two rivals desperate to own a champion. The lawyer's papers, the legal threats. These were just leverage. "And what do you want, Mrs. Patterson?" Laura asked quietly from her position by the window. The elderly woman's eyes softened. "I want what's best for legacy. I spent my life breeding horses meant to run, not to be status symbols or investment properties." Outside, they could hear promise or legacy, moving restlessly in the paddock, as if sensing his fate was being decided. "There's something none of you know," Jimmy spoke up from where he'd been silently observing. "Something about that fire that changes everything." All eyes turned to the former jockey. "I wasn't going to say anything, not after all these years, but I can't let this happen." Blackwood's face drained of color. "Wash, you need to consider what you're about to do." "I've considered it for 2 years," Jimmy replied, his voice steady. "That fire wasn't an accident, and I know because I was there that night. I saw someone leaving the stables just before the flames started." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's a serious accusation," Thorne said carefully, "one that would require proof." "Which is exactly what I have." Jimmy reached inside his jacket and pulled out an old flip phone. "I was recording video of the new foal that night, a tradition for all the special ones, but I caught something else in the background." Before he could continue, the sound of tires on gravel drew everyone's attention. Through the window, they watched as the county sheriff's car pulled up alongside the other vehicles. Mrs. Patterson smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Right on time. I took the liberty of inviting Sheriff Collins to join us. He's bringing some files from the original fire investigation that mysteriously went missing." She turned to Tom. "Before we decide anything about Legacy's future, I think we need the full truth about his past, don't you?" Blackwood moved toward the door, his confidence visibly shaken. "This is ridiculous. I have meetings to attend." "I'm afraid you'll want to stay, Mr. Blackwood," came a new voice as the sheriff entered without knocking, a thick folder under his arm and a grim expression on his weathered face. "We've reopened the investigation into the Oak Ridge fire, and there are some questions about insurance fraud that need answering." Tom stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by power and wealth beyond anything he'd ever known, yet somehow holding all the cards. The horse outside, whatever his name truly was, had changed everything. And as the sheriff laid the folder on the table, opening it to reveal photographs and documents, Tom realized that the race they'd won today was just the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous contest. "Before we go any further," the sheriff said, looking directly at Blackwood, "I should inform you that anything you say can and will be used against you." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of depositions, legal meetings, and newspaper headlines. The county courthouse had never seen such crowds as the day William Blackwood was formally charged with insurance fraud, arson, and animal cruelty. His carefully constructed empire began to crumble as investors pulled out and racing authorities launched their own investigations into his practices. Jimmy Walsh's video evidence had been damning, grainy but clear enough to show Blackwood's distinctive silhouette leaving the Oak Ridge stables minutes before the first flames appeared. Financial records revealed that Oak Ridge had been refusing Blackwood's increasingly aggressive offers to buy Phantom's legacy and the champion bloodline he represented. When he couldn't buy what he wanted, he decided no one else could have it either. "Some folks think money can buy anything," Sheriff Collins had remarked to Tom after the arrest. "They forget that in small communities, secrets have a way of finding the light." Howard Thorne had distanced himself quickly, claiming no knowledge of his rival's actions, but his efforts to acquire Promise, now officially confirmed as Phantom's legacy, hadn't stopped. His offers to Tom grew more generous by the day. On a golden afternoon 3 months after the race, Mrs. Patterson sat in her wheelchair beside Tom on the porch of the Henley farmhouse, watching Legacy gallop freely across the green pasture. "Have you decided?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the horse. Tom nodded slowly. "We have. We're keeping him." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Even though Thorne offered you enough money to buy 3 farms this size?" "Money's not everything," Tom said, the simple truth of it settling comfortably between them. "My grandfather always said that some things aren't meant to be sold." The elderly woman reached over to pat his hand. "Your grandfather was a wise man." "That's exactly what I told Blackwood when he tried to buy Legacy's mother." She paused, watching as Annie approached the fence and Legacy trotted over to greet her. "My lawyers have drawn up the papers. Oak Ridge Farms will retain breeding rights, but ownership transfers to Henley Farms, along with a partnership that includes funding for proper facilities." Tom turned to her in surprise. "Mrs. Patterson, that's too generous." "It's not generosity," she interrupted gently. "It's good business. That horse knows who saved him. He runs for you in a way he'd never run for anyone else. I've been around horses my entire life, Mr. Henley. I know a perfect match when I see one." The settlement from Blackwood's insurance company paid for the renovation of the Henley farm, transforming it into a modest but well-equipped training facility. Laura's dream of opening a therapeutic riding program for children became reality, with Legacy serving as the gentle ambassador who drew visitors from across the state. Jimmy Walsh stayed on as their trainer, his expertise helping to develop a small but impressive stable of horses. The Kentucky circuit had a new rising star in Henley Farms, not the biggest or the wealthiest operation, but one built on second chances and authentic connection. 1 year later, as Legacy prepared for his second Bluegrass Stakes, a reporter asked Tom what he'd learned from the whole experience. Tom looked out across his thriving farm, at Annie exercising a yearling, of Laura guiding a child through their first riding lesson, at the championship trophy displayed without pretension in their family kitchen window. "I learned that value isn't always obvious at first glance," he said simply, "and that sometimes the things people laugh at today become the things they envy tomorrow." He smiled, watching Legacy prance sideways with playful energy. "But mostly I learned that the best victories aren't just about crossing finish lines. They're about finding where you belong and recognizing true worth when others miss it." As if hearing his words, Legacy lifted his head and let out a joyful whinny that echoed across the Kentucky hills. No longer the horse no one wanted, but a champion who had found his rightful home.